In the United States, one major event can be pinpointed as the first real push for LGBTQ recognition. On June 28, 1969, the police decided to raid a gay club called the Stonewall Inn. Despite the fact that the club was serving alcohol without a proper license, many people perceived the raid as unfair because it seemed at the time that police were targeting gay clubs in particular. While authorities looked the other way when it came to illegal actions of other clubs and bars, gay clubs were almost always at a disadvantage. As the police continued their raid of the club, a large crowd began to form outside. After a few drag queens and lesbians were forced into a police car, the crowd became violent and began throwing bottles at the police. Only 2 policemen were mildly injured by the protest, which ended that very night. The following day, however, over 1,000 protesters showed up and refused to back down without a fight. Eventually, it was necessary for New York's riot police squad to step in and end the protest. Despite the dramatic actions the police took, several smaller riots continued throughout the New York community for 6 days after the initial event. Although this protest only lasted for about a week, it marked the first organized public defense of homosexuality in world history. Naturally, this protest led to the creation of several organizations, more public recognition, and organized meetings for the queer community. In the 1960s and 70s, the LGBTQ community took a stand against homophobia through protests and organizations, finding more recognition in psychology, and achieving representation in popular culture. As a result of these brave actions, queer people can now find safety in the media and in politics. Prior to the Stonewall Riots, the LGBTQ community faced regular discrimination and were subject to unfair representation in the legal system. Protests were not entirely unheard of prior to the Stonewall Riots, and acts of defiance did occur, such as the Mattachine Society step-in. In this event, members of the society would announce their homosexuality and would then be refused drinks by bars due to the fact that gay drunks were considered more disorderly than straight drunks. The rejected customers took advantage of their right to sue the New York Liquor Authority, and their win ultimately led to the New York Commission of Human Rights declaring that everyone had the right to be served in bars, regardless of sexual orientation. While this was a bold statement for the time, no laws were passed supporting it, rendering it virtually ineffective. This protest in particular may not have had immediate visible effects for the LGBTQ community, but it was small wins like this that eventually allowed the movement to gain momentum in society. The Stonewall Riots raised public awareness for the mistreatment of queer people and encouraged the formation of several new organizations, which would eventually lead to a sense of community. Almost immediately after the protests, an organization titled the Gay Liberation Front was formed. It was the first organization to use the term gay in their title. Although this organization only lasted until 1972, it made an impact on American society by speaking out not only against homophobia, but major societal issues such as racism and sexism. A year after the Stonewall Riots, on June 28, 1970, the first gay pride parade was held in New York's Central Park. Pride parades were seen as a safe environment where people could be with others similar to them, which was incredibly important for the movement because the combined strength of the entire community would always be greater than the strength of one person alone. As years passed, these parades spread to multiple states throughout the country, and eventually even to countries outside the United States. The LGBTQ community found growing awareness in the medical field of psychology as public recognition grew. Sexual orientation was not largely studied in the field of psychology until the 1900s. Initially, Sigmund Freud believed there was an innate bisexuality in every human being, and hidden unconscious conflicts would determine whether a person later acted out in a homosexual or heterosexual sense. Alfred Kinsey countered Freud's claims and insisted that sexual orientation could only be defined through a spectrum, and with this belief he later went on to create a scale weighted from 0 to 6, 0 being no trace of homosexuality and 6 being no sign of heterosexuality. This means of determining sexual orientation, created in 1948, was later termed the Kinsey scale, and it is still used in psychology today as a measure of a person's flexibility in regards to sexuality. As a result of the brand new widespread knowledge of homosexuality and growing public awareness due to the Stonewall Riots, the American Psychology Association decided to remove homosexuality as a mental illness from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders in 1973. The LGBTQ community was able to triumph due to the removal of homosexuality from the DSM because people's sexual orientation could not be criminalized under false medical claims as it had been in the past. This admission allowed for more and more queer people to find their way into political fields and into the media. The Stonewall Riots and APA acceptance of homosexuality opened the doors for better public representation of queer figures in American society. For example, in 1974, Kathy Kozachenko was the first openly gay elected official in the United States. She was voted into the Michigan City Council. Just 3 years later, Harvey Milk was elected into the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. He campaigned to help lesbians and gays remain in the workforce after coming out. Milk was assassinated a year after being elected into office by a man named Dan White, and although White's actions were not motivated by homophobia, the public was outraged by Milk's murder and believed White's punishment of 7 years in prison was too weak of a sentence. As a result, over 10,000 protesters got together on Milk's 49th birthday and peacefully demonstrated their belief that the whole crime had been handled unjustly. While representation through political figures reached the country as a whole, mass media was still the most efficient means of spreading awareness. Due to the rising topic of homosexuality following the major events in its movement, the 1970s featured the emergence of gay representation in various media outlets. Movies like The Boys in the Band and Fortune in Men's Eyes featured seemingly stereotypical depictions of gay men, leading to controversy about whether or not these movies actually supported gay rights. However, as the 70s progressed, more gay films were created that included more genuine representations of queer people in American society. However, not all of Hollywood was accepting of gay rights, leading many movies to purposefully cast gay personalities in a negative light. Music also opened up a new world of possibility for the gay community. Maxine Feldman is credited with creating the first out lesbian song titled Angry Athis in 1971. Following Feldman's music, many artists and bands came together to create openly gay songs in the 1970s. Representation was incredibly important for the community because for the first time it was possible for young queer voices to see people like them succeeding in a heterosexual-dominated world and realize that they had the ability to do so as well. From politics to television to music, queer people took a stand against those who opposed them and forced the world to acknowledge their voices in the 1960s and 1970s. 10 years after the Stonewall Riots, 75,000 people participated in the National March on Washington in defense of gay rights, successfully ending the two most important decades for the LGBTQ community to date. The Stonewall Riots had a massive impact in the 1970s, and even in 2017 we can still see ripples of the events that would forever change the lives of queer people. Though the fight is still not over, people who identify as anything other than heterosexual can now feel safe to live in American society. In the past decade, the LGBTQ community has made even more notable advancements, from regular representation in popular television to the legalization of gay marriage in June 2015. Today, if a person is refused service in a public place due to their sexual orientation, they can take their case to court and have the possibility of succeeding against the opposition. Today, if a person is abused by their family for coming out, they can find sanctuary online and through youth organizations. Today, a person can openly embrace and accept who they are, no matter their preferences. All of this was made possible by one simple protest beginning just under 50 years ago. The people who took a stand against homophobia and fought for what they knew was right were the very people who paved the way for generations following them. The fight for gay rights may not be over, but people will continue to stand up for what they believe in, just as was done on June 28, 1969.